For your convenience, please turn your cameras and microphones off during the webinar. For questions and comments, please use the chat located in the center of the bottom of your screen. We will now start the webinar.
Hello, good morning. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Duran, and I am the Chief of the Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States. And again, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Closing the Gap, Gender Equality for Port Competitiveness. Today, we have three wonderful, very experienced and smart, intelligent women presenting. We have, of course, Jennifer Nugget Hill from Tropical. We have Dr. Yvette Johnson from WEMAC, from the Women's International Maritime Association of the Caribbean. And then we have Ms. Cynthia Hudson, CEO of Hudson Analytics. And today, our three speakers, and I must mention and recognize that we are at this juncture trying to establish a memorandum of understanding with WEMAC to formalize our collaboration. And let me remind the audience that both Tropical Shipping and Hudson Analytics are proud associate members of the SIP. So we are all in the community. This is the SIP community. And I'm very, very proud and humbled by their presence. As we know, that women's unique contributions to the sector and their unique perspective and energy and what they bring to the table, it's been proven that makes a port more competitive in the same way that women on high executive position make any company more competitive. This is not an invention of mine. You can look it up online. Mona Swoboda from the CIP, who will be coordinating, will be moderating this webinar, can give you information on that. But it is a fact, ladies and gentlemen, that having women in executive positions in your firm will make you more competitive. In that arena, we will have three different perspectives today. I'm sorry, I can't speak for some reason. We'll have the shipping perspective from Ms. Nugget Hill. We will have the collaboration and the women in the Caribbean perspective from Dr. Johnson. And then from Ms. Hudson, we will have a very important and particular perspective of women in business. And so we're very excited to have you in this seminar and to start. Again, let me welcome our three speakers. And because I know we want to get into the meat of things, I'm going to just end this short introduction by thanking both Monica Blanco for her organization, thanking Martin Sartillan and Real ID for the Zoom and the technological component. And last but not least, thanking Ms. Mona Swoboda, who, as everybody knows, is my right and left hand. And she will take it on from here. So Mona, please take it off. And Jen, Yvette, and Cynthia, again, thank you so much for supporting our work. Mona, if you care to take the floor, thank you so much and welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Jorge, and also from me, a heartfelt welcome to today's session, and happy International Women's Month. I think this is a very, very fitting opportunity to gather today and not only celebrate women's accomplishments in the industry, but also identify and discuss where some of the challenges remain and how we can tackle those. So I'm very, very excited for a very fruitful and rich discussion. And as Jorge mentioned, yes, there have been extensive studies that found that women in leadership positions contribute to more competitive and sustainable economies. So I'm looking forward to hearing how that applies to our port sector, our port and maritime industries. As Jorge mentioned, we are joined today by 3 outstanding professionals, and I will start by introducing our first panelist, my dear friend, Jennifer Nuggan-Hill. She began her career, her shipping and logistics career with tropical shipping in 1995 as the island manager for St. Croix in the United States Virgin Islands. She held several management positions, including being appointed in 1999 as the first female assistant vice president and trade manager for Puerto Rico, the US and British Virgin Islands. She is currently the Director of Governmental and Community Affairs and works with the company's management leaders on its public policy agenda, as well as manages the company's community affairs and donation programs. Jennifer also works with the company's various managers to develop their port-specific business continuity plans. And in that context, Jennifer has lent us her expertise in some of our improved disaster risk management workshops that we've conducted. And she's truly fantastic and really knows what she's talking about. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for that support. Jennifer's professional membership includes Women International Shipping and Trade Association, WISTA, Florida chapter. She's also a member of WEMAC, the Women in Maritime Association Caribbean, and she's a board member of the American Caribbean Maritime Foundation, which provides scholarships to Caribbean students attending maritime colleges in the Caribbean. And with that, I will hand it on over to Jennifer. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you so very much. I appreciate such a warm introduction. And good morning, everyone. This is an exciting morning for us and a month of celebration. We always say 1 month is never enough to celebrate women and our achievements, but we'll take it. We're grateful for the attention. This morning, I'm just going to share with you a little bit about what I think is an incredible opportunity. And I'm so grateful to the company that I work for, the partners that we have engaged in this subject, which is an important part of our strategic competitiveness as a shipping company, primarily and especially doing business in the Caribbean. So for me, next slide, it is absolutely a most timely conversation. And I want to thank the leadership of the OAS and the SIP, Jorge, Mona, Monica, the entire team there. We are honored to be an associate member of this initiative to talk through the conversations that are important in terms of port in the Caribbean, port in Central and Latin America becoming competitive, how important it is to ensure that we become world-class ports, because trade is what makes economic development strategy work. So from that context, closing the gap and gender equality for port competitiveness as our agenda, our focus and our topic is today, is really important. And I am just happy to be able to share this panel with my colleagues, our VP of Women in Development for WEMAC, Dr. Johnson, our educator, and of course, my great WISTA sister partner and an incredible CEO for a company that is just on the cutting edge, Hudson Analytics. So Cynthia, I'm glad that you're here. So let me just start with really just a few points, and I want to leave the opportunity for conversation. Keep tapping. And I just want to share a little bit about why I believe that what Jorge said in terms of women and our competitive advantage for smart companies. I just want to quickly share a little bit about the company that I work for and our strategic engagement as it relates to how we view port competitiveness as a user of ports. We also happen to also be in locations where we manage the port location operationally by ourselves, but primarily we partner with public ports where the owner-operator are that of the country's ports. But from observation and experience of observing this for as long as I've been seeing, and I've been part of this industry now for almost 26 years, and I have been able to observe where I believe growth has occurred and why I think those growth creates competitive advantage, both in the public and private sector. So I'll share a little bit about that experience from my observation. So quickly, in terms of where Tropical has taken this as a part of how we view the strategic competitiveness, is that we started this company, in 1962 in Freeport, Bahamas. The owners of the company, the start of the company, the Birdsall family, were developers, wanted to get their cargo into the islands a lot more timely. Bahamas, Freeport in particular, was beginning to develop very rapidly into where it is today, one of the best locations in the Caribbean for ship chandling, ship repairs, and so forth. Today, Tropical has advanced itself. We're in about 40 locations throughout the Caribbean. We own our vessels. We're about 1,500 employees. And I think most significantly for this conversation today is that in 2014, two women acquired Tropical Shipping, three sisters, one has passed. But today, Tropical is owned by Saltchuk, which is headquarters in Seattle, Washington, very much in the space of transportation, both ocean, air, and land. So we're honored that two women own our company. And I think it presents opportunities for us in a space that I think demonstrate that a company, that is as significant as it is, can in fact do it. So the big news, and I think the important conversation and point that I want to point out to you today is when I think about where Tropical Shipping and its partners in the region, in the Caribbean specifically, has been engaged, is that 16 of our most profitable profit centers in our company today are managed by supercharged women. I believe that it's a business imperative today that demand that we do more with our intentional mentoring program and our talent acquisition, and I'll talk a little bit. So more to come. Next slide. What I have observed in terms of this company's, next slide, is that in every port location, every port of call, and I share this map specifically because while some of us are very familiar with the Caribbean, and I know that we've got several folks from all over other places participating, but I wanted to highlight this because I think it tells a story for the topic at hand, that of competitiveness in port and the role of gender. Is almost in every port of call, there's a leading lady in a strategic role. Some are on the public sector side, running ports from the cruise line perspective, but also for those who are very much in the private sector. In our space, it is what we call the strategic or the secret sauce to the success. On my next slide, I want to highlight a few of where those individuals that are happens to be women, the strong leaders, as I refer to them, who understand that it is about the profitability of the business. I'm happy to announce that, in Dominica, Tamara Lowe was our manager there. She's now taking over a new challenge and will be the new manager, shifting from Dominica to Antigua. I point this out because, and I could highlight all 16 women that are running these strategic ports for our company, but I want to point out where you'll see the difference in terms of size of ports. Next slide. For example, Antigua Barbuda is a bigger port than it is for Anguilla. Anguilla is a very interesting space for us in that it is one of our smaller port of calls, and it's operated by an owner-operator of an agency that represents Tropical Shipping, Sheila Haskins, who's been in this business and understand almost all aspects from a commercial and operational perspective, that has made her own business of that a very successful one in Antigua. She's been part of this process, owning her own business, a family-owned business, and serving as Tropical Shipping's island manager on the island of Anguilla. And so as we shift from that to where you'll see another port location where another leading lady on the next slide that is running our business in another location, for example, what we call our transshipment hub. A big deal in our industry in the shipping side is the transshipment of goods, moving cargo, receiving it in one location, and then being able to move it through a different location. I'm sure many of the folks who are on a webinar today understand the business of transshipment as it relates to ports and port competitiveness in the space of transshipment. The U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola is managed by an extremely talented group of women. And I'm so honored to be connected to that in the sense that they're also leaders, not just in running those ports, but also in leading many different association and organization that they are partner in it, adding to the conversation about the role of women and the competitive advantage. So the regional, from a regional perspective, Maria Del Mar Rodriguez is the first Hispanic assistant vice president for tropical shipping and is responsible for an incredible major part of our business center, that of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. And she shares that leadership with three very, very well, strong, talented, qualified women, Carly Yan in the island of St. Croix, Nisha O'Bain on St. Thomas and St. John, and Carvet Diaz in Puerto Rico. And, you know, I think the purpose of my pointing this out is really, you'll see on the next slide, that this sort of engagement gives cause to the conversation with regards to, so how can we close the gender gap to assure port competitiveness? I think it's important for these 4 points that I just want to throw out as an intervention and for the conversation when the question and answer comes up. And that is it's important if we're going to do this and do this well, is to make this a smart business imperative. Accept the fact that gender equality is important. It is not going away. Accept the fact that the current and upcoming workforce, particularly that of the Generation Z or Gen Z workforce, is going to reject the old status quo. If it's irrelevant with regards to whether you're male or female, it's more important, what are you doing from a transparency perspective to encourage real work, real smart people engage in doing quality work. And I pointed that out because I think as you begin to think about the upcoming workforce and what their expectations are going to be, really, gender equality is not a taboo subject for Gen Zs. So I think we have to get to that place where we accept the fact that this is an important part of creating and assuring port competitiveness, whether it's in the public or private sector. And then I think finally, in that particular point of view, accept the fact that talent acquisition data has proven that an empowered skilled labor pool and availability is going to be important as we look to the next, what I call native generation in terms of technology and how they see the performance of work. And as we transition to the use of technology and digital conversation, which I'm sure my colleague will share when Cynthia comes up. Understand that, and I give credit to the World Economic Forum, who recently did a survey to show and demonstrate that this continues to be a significant part of the conversation about competitiveness, and we know this. And then finally, I'd like to say 4 points on this on the next slide to just, as I wrap up here, is I saw this quote and I was pretty pleased with this. It says, companies can't afford to stick to old strategies or slow moving changes if you really want to talk about creating work satisfaction, productivity, which leads to sustainable competitiveness of world-class ports. In the port of Antigua, in the private sector side that operates the cruise port, there is an incredible lady there that I don't have permission to mention her name at this point, but just search in terms of what's happening on Antigua and its cruise port, an incredible, sharp, talented businesswoman who understand that they needed to take the world-class standards to where the country of Antigua gains and benefit from its world-class port. Certainly there's partners such as Darwin Telemac, who runs the government of Antigua's ports. But there is the success of that port really lies with the fact that an old strategy would not work where the demands of the partners, such as the cruise industry, who's also adopting and accepting the fact that gender is not a taboo subject, but one where it is a business imperative to be smartly hiring smart women. in closing with this thought, recognize that the Generation Z or Gen Z workforce that is currently your workforce that you're going to be looking at, because a lot of us are getting older, we're moving out. You've got to understand that by 2025, 25% of the global population will be those of the Generation Z. That's the workforce. And for them, as I mentioned earlier, digital natives does not recognize the question of your gender. It is irrelevant. It's a non-binding issue. It's one that says we're going to be we're activists. We're concerned about how this world looks, but more importantly, we're concerned about having the right appropriate partners to get the work done. And then finally, on my final slide here, and I'll close with this, that if we think about world-class attainment status for ports, be it cruise or cargo, well-qualified leaders who happens to be women have always shared that they benefit from intentional mentorship. And I want to point this out as we get into the next presentation, that it is so important for collaborative partnership. It is so important to have allyship from the male partners who are currently leading these entities. And I have to tell you that I have seen where the success has begun. It begins with these collaborative partnership. It's the IMO, the UN, WEMAX, WISTA, our academic partners, and certainly companies like mine from the private sector side. And so my final thought here is the mindfulness of the gap. Mind the gap, be mindful of it. The advancement of women to leadership role is a smart business continuity practice. I think today, at the end of the session, we would have closed that as no longer a conversation, but the reality that the gender gap allows you for competitiveness. So I'm going to thank you, and I'll leave the rest of this for our conversation and questions. Back over to you, Mona, for our next partner. I hope we achieved our goal today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You sure did. You beautifully set the stage, I believe, for the discussion later on. And I like your vision towards the future, because I think that's something we hear a lot. How can we attract more women, young women, and with their particular skill set to our industry? So I'm really, really excited to tap into that a little bit more later on in the discussion. So thank you very much for your very insightful presentation, Jennifer. Up next is another dear friend of mine, Dr. Yvette Smith-Johnson. Dr. Smith-Johnson is Vice President of Women and Development on the Governing Council of WEMAC. She is a veteran educator and seasoned maritime education and training professional who shapes quality assurance in maritime education and training through a focus on market needs and industry collaboration in the planning process. Dr. Smith-Johnson has published both scholarly and creative work, and she is the acting director of graduate studies and research at the Caribbean Maritime University. Dr. Johnson, we're very much looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mona. Let me just get my presentation up. I had it up, was looking at it, and it just jumped right away. I don't know if Monica can put it up for me, because you have a copy on your side.
We'll give it a couple of seconds.
The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. But I want to thank Jennifer for leading in, because the truth is Jennifer is, as I said, a member of WISTA, member of WEMAC, and so she has an amazing perspective. I want to talk this morning about, and I know Monica is working to bring up the presentation for me. I want to talk about WEMAC and the work that is done with WEMAC.
Monica, let us know if you have any issues with setting it up.
Yes, I'm sorry. Just let me put it in a minute.
Okay, well, give me a moment. I'll bring it up. And if there are any questions for Jennifer, it can be taken now so that we can do this. I just had it. I was trying to do PowerPoint and it closed.
Good Oh, I think we should, there it is.
We're here, we're here. Thank you
Wonderful.
so much. Awesome, thank you so much, Monica, amazing. So we can go to the next slide. We're looking at closing the gender gap, and we're looking at what WeMAT does. Want to catch two quick definitions as we go. We are talking about competitiveness, and the feature of our presentation this morning is competitiveness. Jennifer gave us a tropical perspective. It's talent that results from acquired knowledge, and we use it to generate and sustain superior performance, as well as face any dynamic that comes to us. When we deal with port competitiveness, we are looking at whatever adds value to the port ecosystem. So we're talking about competition among nations, business ecosystem, the behavior of firms, and the ability to analyze strategic behavior of same. And we are saying, how can women help in this? As we go over to the next slide, moving away from our definitions, we acknowledge that ports are the lifeblood for global business and manufacturing operations. You can go to the next slide for me. Thank you, Monica. And we want to add that the ability to survive in this sector and an ever-changing competitive landscape is a brain function, not just a brawn function. And so we know that it's not a man's domain per se, and we want to bring an argument as WeMAC for gender equity and gender equality. So Audrey McNeil said to us that success in the maritime field is much more about using your intellect than your muscles. And so we want to remember that as we go forward. Thank you, Monica. We go to the next slide. Success is about using intellect, not just muscles. So let's talk about this a little more. WeMAC's mission is to transform the maritime industry through the development and participation of women in the sector within the Caribbean. And so when we stand up to speak, that's what we want to do. Ensure that women are participating and that they have opportunities for development. As we go along, we move from the mission to the next slide. Thank you. Let's look at what the data says. The data says to us that 2% of 1.2 million women in the workforce are employed in the maritime industry. Jennifer, the data says to us that women have 25% participation in port operations in Europe. But when it comes to Latin America and the Caribbean, and this is taken from UNCTAD 2019, we see where 18% of women are participating in port operations. And so we have to face the reality that port operations in Latin America, the Caribbean, which is the space in which WeMAC functions, is a predominantly masculine space. 94% of the women, and we can move the slide, Monica, of those low numbers are employed to the cruise sector, not in the other parts of shipping. 94% of 18% is employed in one space, cruise. So WeMAC has to halt, HALT. It's on your screen. We realize we have to have a strategy to tackle this. We realize that we have to access help, and we realize we have to learn some things, and we also have to take charge. That's our halt. Thank you, Monica, as we go. Have a strategy, accept help, learn, take charge. Let's talk about our strategy. We recognize that there are some drag forces that we have to combat. Shipping is a male-dominated space. Nothing, I mean, we wouldn't have WeMAC and WISTA if it were not. We realize that for women generally, there's a lack of promotion and gender equality and women empowerment, and these things feed into the low numbers of women who are moving in Latin America and the Caribbean, limited resource funding. We see cultural barriers, what we think, and then there are also unconscious barriers. And I'm thankful that Jorge is here and he has none of those barriers. People see a woman on the port and they're wondering, what is she doing here? It's unconscious. We see societal misconceptions and perceptions, barriers of entry to training and educational programs for women. And we see an inundation of stereotypes as to what women ought and ought not to do. As we go to the next slide, those are 8 drag forces, major drag forces that WEMAC has to deal with. So what are some of our strategies? Partnerships and collaboration. So we have an MOU with the Port Management Association of the Caribbean, and there's an MOU with the Caribbean Shipping Association, and thank you, Jorge. We're coming up with the MOU with CIP. These MOUs are strategic action that we're taking. Action towards the provision of training and mentorship, action towards this happening nationally and regionally. We want to see more graduates of the Maritime CEO program. That's one of our MOUs that we're working through, one of our spaces, where we see women empowerment. We want to see mentorship program of women being mentored by men, yes, women being mentored by powerful women like Jennifer Nugent-Hill. And we want to see national chapters in the Women in Maritime Association growing, and moving with the mandate of empowering women. As we go to the next slide. So strategies include partnership, training, mentorship, and these are national and regional efforts. We want to access facilitation. So the MOUs facilitates access to the potential WEMAC members. So when we sign on with the Port Management Association of the Caribbean, we expect that wherever there is a port in the region, as soon as the women come on board, they will be directed to the professional group that is waiting to incubate them. Picture on top of this slide is from a visit of the Governing Council to the Port of Spain. And all these beautiful women in the picture, this is a combination of WEMAC's Governing Council and the 34% of women who are employed at the Port of Spain, to include the general manager who offers sterling leadership right there. They're in the picture again to the left with, well, it's my right, President Tamara, and we have our GM of Port of Spain. We can move in the other picture, which is not so. We have our operations manager, who is a dynamic woman who works on the Port of Spain. And by the way, in the picture is Mr. Colin Young. So we get mentorship from the IMO through the regional coordinator, Mr. Colin Young, of activities. Can go to the next slide. So we are looking forward to the MOU with CIP, and we know that we are going to break more ground as we move forward. We focus on career growth and port development because we want to promote careers in various sectors and industry as women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean. But we want to see women empowered through capacity building, training, internships, knowledge exchange. And what you see in the photo, which is not probably very easy to see, you are seeing pictures of different events, different spaces where women's support is celebrated, different fora where we've been having that discussion. We want mentorship, we want training, we want knowledge exchange, and we're begging for internships so women can grow and seize opportunities for career development where the port is concerned. Next slide, thank you. And as WEMAC continues to do what it is doing, we also recognize the women who are in the spaces, women who are making big moves. So WEMAC shared the insight of Ms. Pearl Gurdin, the manager of security of Suriname Port Management Company, who is actively involved in promoting port security resilience and gender equity. And from time to time, you can go to the next slide, please. We will look at other women who are working already in the space, and we will ask for the support from those women. So we want to establish public-private partnerships. Jennifer just spoke. Tropical Shipping is a private company, but we want government support also, because we want to establish on the government side of operations in each of our member countries from the region. WEMAC wants to establish a connection with the maritime administrators, where when the MARADs are on board, our jobs are easier. We want the MOU with the port managers. We want the private shipping companies to come on board, and definitely with the ports themselves, Port of St. Vincent, Port of Spain, Kingston Wharves Limited, right across the Caribbean. We want to be known and to be having conversation at the level of collegiality, because we are all vested with the interest of the United Nations vision of women emerging from the corners and the recesses of our spaces. And as we go to the next slide, and we emphasize the public-private partnerships, we have to invest in the sharing of knowledge, because a woman on the port, we have to first know where that woman is, what that woman is doing, and then we begin to speak to that woman. And so we have flyers here from 2 sessions that we've held, and we have a number of these because WEMAC has regular discourse via webinars, virtual symposium, and even at our AGM, we do a conference to educate, motivate, and inspire the membership. So for International Women's Day, we had an Empower Her session. We had another session when the Barbados chapter was launched, there was a presentation by a minister of government. And from time to time, we have these sessions where we call people who know to share with those who need to know. People where we can show the product sample of women who have gone through the process of learning on the job, and are now people who are vested with the interest of port development, and we show them as product samples. As we go to the next slide, we wish that this knowledge sharing will continue in all the spaces. So one of the things that we do is that we seek out opportunities for training and I'm using this term, and we keep polishing it as we go on, training the maritime consciousness, training the maritime conscience. We are all in the Caribbean except for our colleagues in Suriname and Guyana. We are all Belize. We are all island states, and yet we have this lack of regard for the potency of the sea which surrounds us. So we're seeking out opportunities for regional and extra-regional internship and scholarship where people study shipping and the allied industry. And we want to thank ACMF, because ACMF, Jennifer, you can convey to ACMF that we really appreciate the scholarship opportunities that are made available through the American Caribbean, Maritime Foundation. One of the things that WEMAC is moving to do is to establish maritime clubs in primary and high schools across the region. We want a space where younger people, the potential workforce, begins to understand and appreciate early out the sea and its importance. And we recognize that we have a number of METIs in the region. We have the UT, University of Trinidad and Tobago, we have the Chaguaramas campus, we have LJ Maritime Academy in the Bahamas, we have AA Maritime in Guyana, and there are other spaces. And of course we have, which is, the love of my heart, the Caribbean Maritime University. And we want to inaugurate some student chapters so that we can train the maritime consciousness and the maritime conscience. People need to see, and a culture needs to be developed in the Caribbean where we value this sea. As we go to the next slide, and I'm winding down, and we want to say, ports are getting it right, and ports have gotten wonderful components of it right. And we give plaudits and kudos to those spaces where things are changing. Manzanillo International Terminal, I had the privilege of visiting, and they're using technology to enable and facilitate jobs that used to exclude women. So women are doing gate operations and shipside operations in Manzanillo, and we can go to the next slide, because it is now technology enabled. Ports, we want ports to employ women as officers. And I'm sorry, Lanice, this was our best picture of you. We want to mention people like CMU alumna and Antigua, Miss Lanice George, and we talked about Antigua and Barbuda Port Authority and the port down there. Lanice is a junior officer and she's a marine pilot in training, and she has skill and competence. She made the Caribbean news when she brought her first huge ship alongside. This is what we want to say, that it can be done. You see in the picture what they call in Manzanillo NASA, where because of technology enablement, women can sit at their desks and manage the gates and manage other things. I don't want to move from this slide without mentioning another CMU alumna, a Jamaican, Miss Shanisha Simpson. She's a senior vessel planner with Perez Isia in Panama. So women can be employed as ship planners, as pilots in training, officers, because the mind and the capacity to learn shipping operations is not gender dictated. So we want a space at the table. As we go to the next slide, we're thanking the ports and the shipping companies that make these opportunities available to the women of the Caribbean. We see where women are employed as equipment operators. Carrier operations are done by women. We see tractor trailers being driven by women. Reach stacker operations are done by women. We want to see the port with greater numbers. I want to introduce you to, in the picture, Ms. Sabina Punwasi, Navigation Officer, graduate of the University of Trinidad and Tobago of the Maritime Program. We want to see more with the faces of women across the Caribbean doing these things on port. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So here are the pros. And Jorge said it, Jennifer said it. If we put women alongside men, what we have is a finishing of the synergy that comes when both genders are sitting at the table. According to findings from Catalyst in 2011, a study showed that women at the decision-making level at ports significantly, they outperform ports that have women at the table, outperform in return on sales, return on invested capital, return on equity. And so we're calling for, as WEMAC, a strong and diverse pool of women in port operations. And we say, they should have the vested interests. It's in the vested interest of port authorities and logistics firm, as we sail forward to make a space for the table, at the table for women. Next slide, please. So those are the pros. But here are the cons. A port that does not embrace the productivity capacity that a woman carries with her will experience suboptimal productivity and will see economic inefficiencies, lack of female skills, because that skill set is different from the other genders, right? And so we want to know that there's an absence of rigidity and there's fluidity that comes with the way women think. And we are not calling for dominance and being domineering. We are asking for synergy and a space at the table. As we go to the next slide. So we know that all persons bring value to the table. So WEMAC is asking the ports across the region for capacity building action. We're asking that where technology is available, train the women too. Where there is an opportunity for hands-on experience, then give some of those spaces, create a ratio and give some to women. We're saying without caveat that competence and a good working attitude is not gender defined. So we do not need to see these great numbers where only men are at the table. If a woman wants to sit at the table, please make room for her. And we are going to say, as WEMAC, that indeed coaching and mentoring of women is important in the same fashion that coaching and mentoring of men is important. So if you're going to hire a woman, please don't throw her to the wolves. Ease her into the job and let the performance speak for itself. We're saying, as WEMAC, Jennifer, make a place at the table for women in the port operations across the region and in port business. And we're saying you look at the resumes carefully, port managers, hiring officers. Please remember that we're not asking to dominate the other gender. We are not asking for, to be the sole players. We're asking, make room at the table. And when you look to hire somebody, please remember Lanice George, remember Shanisha Simpson, remember the people who are in the ports doing good business. And remember that the best man for the job may well be a woman. That's all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica.
Yes, thank you, Monica, so much for that very impromptu technical support there. Thank you very much. And most importantly, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for your wonderful presentation. I think you beautifully highlighted the importance of partnerships and collaboration, and how by joining forces, we can achieve our goals in a more efficient manner. And that's what it's truly all about. So I would love to speak about that maybe a little bit later in our discussion. But for now, I thank you again so much for your presentation, and we'll go right back over to another dear friend of mine. It's truly today a day amongst friends, and I love it. My dear friend, Cynthia Hudson. She is the CEO and founder of Hudson Analytics, a global maritime risk consultancy serving the maritime transportation sector, headquartered in Philadelphia here in the United States and internationally from Greece to Indonesia. Since founding Hudson Analytics in 1986, Cynthia led the firm into maritime security for ports and vessels, providing port vulnerability security assessment work at hundreds of ports and facilities worldwide. And in 2016, she expanded Hudson Analytics cyber operations to design and deliver cybersecurity and cyber risk management solutions. Well known and highly regarded throughout the maritime transportation industry for her work and contributions in her field, Cynthia was honored by the OAS-SIP with the 2016 Maritime Award of the Americas as the Outstanding Woman in the maritime and port sectors. She serves on a number of industry boards, and she is the president of WISTA Delaware River and Bay Chapter, and she is a director of the North American Marine Environment Protection Association. We're so excited to have you, Cynthia, and I'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you very kindly, Mona. I'm going to try to share the screen. If it doesn't work, please, Monica, be ready to do your magic again. Let's see if this works. I don't know. Here we are. Let me try. Well, something has come up. Do you see that?
Yes, we see it, and I think that is on our end. So we'll manage the slides if that works for you.
That's
okay?
fine. I'm trying to figure it now. How can I? Okay, so you have that, and that is just perfect. So I want to thank the SIP, Jorge, Mona, Monica. You do such a great job. And this subject, as you know, is really dear to my heart. But following Jennifer Nugent-Hill and following Dr. Yvette Smith-Johnson is really some sort of a challenge that I'm not sure I'm equal to. What dynamic women, and what a picture they've been able to paint from different perspectives of the industry, and it really is inspirational to me as well, and what we're trying to do. Monica, next slide, please. We are a company that essentially is looking at risk management, and we understand that there are many different pieces of that. Today's topic is capacity building through closing the gender gap. And it's very interesting to us because we see from our perspective, working with our clients, which are ports, which are terminals, which are government agencies, et cetera, and also vessel owners worldwide, we can see the difference between people or organizations who embrace women as equal, let's call partners and participants within the workplace, and what their companies do and mean and how they function in comparison to those that don't. So the figures that Dr. Smith-Johnson quoted, you can see that traveling around the world in real life, and you can see the differences, which is really something palpable and quite interesting. Next slide, please. So, is there a gap? I think yes, there still is a gap. And exactly what is a gender gap? I mean, what is the gender gap for us? Is there a gap that we need to come and wrestle with? Well, from the boardroom to the dock, key port management and manning is made up of a majority of men. Still, why does that gap inhibit port competitiveness? Well, I think you've painted a great picture, my predecessor speakers today, but let's call it the non-effective utilization of resources. When every resource counts, especially when considering competitiveness in the marketplace. So skills and brain power are wasted. And so we're still jumping over a real gap. Now, I wanted to expand the idea of the gap. And in some ways, I think, Dr. Johnson, you alluded to this too. But, you know, I'm going to focus you on a particular section of what I consider to be the future of port operations. And in the sector that I'm going to talk about, I think you'll see easily that there is a gap in employment. There is a gap in promotion. You may be employed, but you may not be promoted. There are difficulties with women getting the degrees necessary or bringing those degrees forward. Maybe those are being closed a bit, but not completely. There's a retention gap. So people are hiring women, ports are hiring women and other maritime businesses, but those women may not stay, perhaps because of the other reasons I'm mentioning. There is a workplace culture gap. In other words, when you are hired, is there still the good old boys club? And can a woman hope to achieve success without the communications available to the men who join that club? And clearly women will be normally excluded from. There's a representation gap. What does that mean? It means in the workplace, voices need to be heard. Are representative voices from women that are present? Are those voices heard properly? I'd submit that many times they're not. There's an equity gap. Are women treated equitably in the marketplace, in the workplace? Not necessarily. There's a startup or founder gap. Are women starting startups? Founding startups, do they have the courage? Can they get the funding? Are they able to participate in the same way as men to contribute their skills and imagination? As a newco, as a startup company, can they get that funding? A pay gap, we all know about that. And I'd say a leadership gap. Next slide, please. So competitive posture is what we wanted to talk about. And I'm going to submit some things that some of which have been covered and some which have not. This is just my view. I think competitive posture of an organization is the stance that is required for success. It's not enough to just say we like our operations, we like them the way they are. We need to be able to compete with others in our marketplace. And it starts, in my opinion, with a word that a lot of us avoid in business, but I call it holistic. A holistic approach to our present understanding of what a port community means and what is important. We get some clues from this through what I'd call the relatively new concept of ESG, environment, society, and governance. Society can have lots of different elements to it, as can governance. Environment is better understood now than it used to be. But looking at that, we know that you can generate value for all organizational stakeholders, such as employees, customers, suppliers, financiers, and for the society, the local society, regional society, and the environment in which we now live. So encompassing strategies and best practices for preparedness, prevention, and response, like, for example, disaster recovery preparedness that Jennifer is so involved with, like port community systems, like building bridges to our local communities, economic bridges to the region, and importantly, resilience. These are issues that lead to sustainability. This means we're not in business just for this week. We have enhanced our competitive posture by looking to ESG and therefore to sustainability. In other words, we'll be around next week. Why am I talking about this? Well, I hope that you will see its relationship really to the gender gap being closed in order to move up a ladder. So we can ask ourselves, is what we are doing innovative as women? Is it an improvement over what already is in the industry? Is it sustainable? Do smarter people than me or than my group agree? Will anyone pay for this? Next slide, please. So I'm talking today about an aspect of the port community called digitalization. And digitalization, in my opinion, has already started. But if we looked at ports and the way they were run 10, 15 years ago, digitalization was barely a word. Digitalization now is leading to the ability to optimize, the ability to be resilient, and the ability to focus on other things that not only ports, but the entire maritime business has to think about. For example, the global focus on food. For example, the food security and energy security and food security, which go hand in hand. And in my opinion, that is leading to risk management. Next slide, please. So let's take a quick dive into the world of data digitalization and the port. Digitalization really looks at risk, and it's two aspects to it. If you are not digitalized, can you compete? If you are not using the data, acquiring the data, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just looking at a ship now, and I'm looking at how a ship is looking at its conditions, its environmental aspects like emissions, et cetera, planned and remote maintenance. If a ship has a wealth of data to really manage and look at, the port is going to be a fountain of data that we have to acquire through a digitalized process and then understand and warehouse. Cyber risk comes along. Now, you'll see in a minute, I hope, why I'm mentioning this. This has to do with integrated supply chains, et cetera. And you're coming now to the area, mobility-enabled workforce. Can our workforce be where they need to be virtually or literally in order to do the job? So things we never talked about, like data lakes, data mining, analytics, we never talked about these things. I'd say it's all about the data. Next paragraph, next slide, please. So here is talking about a woman in business. This impressive lady is one of the chiefs of IBM. Now, I can't pretend to be in that space, but what she's trying to tell us is data is it. It's all about data and what we're going to do with data and how cybercrime goes along with data. Next slide, please. Now, this is a throwback, and this is kind of pulling in what we're talking about on the gender gap side. This is Jean Kirkpatrick. She was a woman that I didn't completely always agree with, but she achieved a really interesting role in the United States Reagan administration. And she spoke her mind, very, very plain spoken. She said, society welcomes women, basically women are not barred from breadwinning roles. They're only barred or made difficult to enter economic roles that are profitable and really respectable. So where do women fit in exactly? Closing the gender gap is a work in progress. If this statement was made in the 80s, and we're still talking about this issue in 2023, I think that we have to realize that this is still going on and it's a slow process. Next slide, please. The challenge really now falls to this cohort of women. That means us. And, some of us are getting longer in the tooth. So I would like to submit that it means you. You are the younger women. And this means that you may be faced with a picture like this, climbing, really a challenging climb, in high heels and a dress, by the way. But what is it that we're climbing toward? What do we want to do, and how do we get there? Next slide, please. If we're talking about how women in the past have faced that gender gap, we can think about Anne Bonny. So, maybe her passion for the money and the position was overcome by the legality of said position, et cetera, et cetera. She did meet her demise eventually. We don't want to do that. Next slide, please. We are wanting to look into the horizon and say to ourselves, where are we going and how do we get there? The how do we get there is quite, I think, important. It's education, it's skill sets, but it's also relationships. And it's passion for the woman herself, willingness to put herself on the table, and to put herself on a table in a strong way. And that means to fail. That means to be willing to succeed. Success has its own issues and barriers. To carve out a platform, as I mentioned before, to have a voice, not to hide in the shadows waiting for recognition or to be given the opportunity to find it and to seize it. How to measure, can you measure your own personal efforts for yourself? Can you measure it for your organization? Can you measure it for your larger community? What does it look like? How do you create and deliver value? Can you innovate? So where do you want to go? We mentioned before the dock, the vessel, the technology space, which is what I've been trying to emphasize here. And the technology space is informing the dock and the vessel. It's informing logistics. It's informing the supply chain. It's the basis for the port to be able to communicate and operate. So what I'm encouraging with closing the gender gap is that women who have the ability and interest and desire, take a look at technology. There are so many areas of technology that are available to you and that are not being entered. And when we look at the gender gap, the technology area is a place where the gender gap is so big and so obvious that it's hard to believe that this is 2023. Silicon Valley has shocking numbers. There's lots of women employed, but are those women in leadership? Are those women equitably treated? Are those women experiencing a pay gap, et cetera, et cetera? So, okay, that's an opportunity, but how do we do this? I mentioned education. Next slide, please. The educational situation. Education is not for everyone, but education enables. So not every young woman is destined to go to sea, but the picture here you wouldn't have seen 20 or 30 years ago. It's here. Women are sitting at the maritime academies in the Caribbean, as well as in, where I'm familiar, other academies within the United States. Enough? No. And we have some significant issues with some of the young women who have gone to sea for internship after their degree. They faced real issues, real problems in sailing for vessel owners. We're trying to correct some of those now. It's shocking, really. But we have shipping, ports, terminals, energy, government, defense, these are places where we can encourage young women to get forward, to listen to what the opportunities could be for them. And technology is key. Next slide, please. Let's not ignore the boardroom. This is a profession, and we need to be sitting on boards. We need to be in management teams. This is a picture from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And once again, 30 years ago, this picture would never be able to be taken. It does show that there's movement. Is it sustainable? If we take that picture 2 years ago, will you see women? Will you see them supported? Will you see them encouraged? Will you see them included? Next slide, please. If we look at what we want to be, we're going to say, all right, where we want to be. It is hard. It's going to be that eventually things begin to fit together and make sense. Every one of these experiences leads us to our growth and development. And this is where competitiveness arises. Your organization can use your skill sets and you can enable your organization. Next slide, please. So what does it mean? Well, there are some leadership lessons that I've internalized over time. You know, get the best team or work with the best team that you can. Be willing to share your vision with that team and listen to them. Do the right thing, not only the compliance level thing, do the right thing and show yourself as willing to do the job yourself. But be a mentor where you can. Next slide, please. And I think this is our last slide. We're looking over the horizon now. Instead of jumping over the gap only, we are pursuing opportunities that hopefully will become equally represented in all fields of endeavor within the maritime industry. Women of every color, of every background, we need to maintain our focus to affect this change. And we have to ask our valuable port and maritime entities to look at this and help women, instead of climbing up that impossible peak, to be able to join men within the industry to create the future of our ports, of our terminals, of our vessel operations, and all the maritime industries that are included in that. Next slide. Thank you so much for inviting me and including me. I hope something that I've been able to share may have resonated with you today.
Thank you so very much, Cynthia. And I think Jorge said it earlier when he introduced our panelists, you each bring your own unique perspectives to the table today. And I think that's what's going to make this discussion so rich and insightful. So I really, really appreciate your perspective, you know, as a CEO and founder of a maritime consultancy. It's really wonderful to see what you've accomplished. And I most certainly look up to you, and I know we've had many conversations about that. I truly look up to you and hope to be like you one day. Now I would like to invite Jennifer and Dr. Johnson back on the virtual stage because we are getting ready to get into our Q&A. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for writing here in the chat. The floor is also yours to our participants. If you have any specific questions for our panelists, or I see there's a wonderful discussion happening in the chat, many wonderful remarks. I see one comment on intersectionality. I think that's really, really wonderful that we're having a lively discussion in the chat as well. But if anyone has a question for our panelists, please feel free to type away and we'll make sure to ask away. I did prepare some questions, of course, for our discussion. And my first question is for Jennifer. Jennifer, you spoke about the Gen Z, right? And I wanted to know, recruiting Generation Z workers requires intentional approach if ports are going to be competitive and have favored status of port of call. What else can port management officials do to hire this workforce?
That's really good, and I have to go back to two things that Dr. Johnson said and Cynthia as well in talking about the world of digitization or digitalization that's occurring, and the Caribbean is on a trajectory. I mean, I'm absolutely amazed at how much speed we're heading in that direction. I think specifically to answer your question there with regards to these wonderful group of talented digital natives, I keep referring to them, and it's not my phrase. I saw it somewhere that says you got to refer to the Gen Z as the digital native because that's the language they know. That's the era in which they were raised. But I think the idea of removing, any cultural biases and the recruiting strategy, the talent acquisition strategy that companies must employ to hire this generation of workers. I think where we see today one of the things that I've learned about and observing the Gen Z is that their mindset towards work is they work to live, not live to work. So if we're going to craft and carve out a place in the competitive world of port operations or port management, or even in our own space of the shipping industry, is recognize that they're about transparency. The job description that we used to use doesn't make any sense to them. I've observed some of that in my own space, but we can't afford to be ambiguous in the quality and content of work today. We also have to mind ourselves about the type of work environment that Gen Z workforce want to participate in. And I think flexibility is going to be important because they recognize the technology has advanced to the place where you can, in fact, create a work environment that allows some work to be remote. Certainly we want folks in our industry, for example, we can't run a ship remotely in all aspect of it. A lot of it we do, our vessel planning, for example, how we stow containers on our ships are all done in a technology environment. So recognizing that the way we are going to stimulate work and create a competitive advantage using this generation Z has to be that the mindset has to change. Know that work is not the same way as we used to. I like showing up to work and I like being in the space because I like being around people. But understand that if we're going to maintain a competitiveness, and I don't care where we are in the world, it is happening globally. The Caribbean is not exempt from this, certainly not Latin America. So understand that that intentional approach to hiring Generation Z is going to be a strategy that must be employed for competitiveness. And I heard that from Dr. Yvette, as well as from Cynthia. Technology knows no gender.
That is absolutely true. And I would like to echo what you said, that the digitalization of port operations in the Caribbean is moving fast ahead. And at the SIP, we're very honored that we were able to assist Barbados Port Inc. in implementing their port community system with our help here from our colleagues at Hudson Analytics. And I would like to mention, I don't know if she's joining us today, but their assistant manager of digital innovation and development is a woman, Ms. Kemi Brewster, and she is wonderful, and she has such a wonderful vision, and her leadership in this initiative as Barbados is implementing their port community system is something that I would just want to highlight here.
Yes,
because
as a beneficiary of that, I can say yes, our Barbados operations, yes, she is an incredible leader.
She truly is, and I hope she can hear us talking about her, because I think it's also really about highlighting the amazing work that women are doing in our ports and in our maritime industries. But Jennifer, I think we've all been taking notes here. I think you've left us with some actionable items here to look towards the future, right? And to see how we can attract more women as our ports are becoming more IT reliant. And so I think your points are very well taken. Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson, I have a question for you. Given your experience in the industry and as a seasoned educator, what are some of the skills and qualities and abilities that women bring to the table in our industries?
Thank you for that question, Mona. Women bring agility, the ability to adapt, multitask, and learn. The learning curve for a woman who is intentional about learning is very flat. We recognize that we have to do many things. Women also bring connectivity, because women are very good at relationships. I've heard men in my neck of the woods say, we have to start a MEMAC. And I'm like, what is that? A Men in Maritime Association, because of the connectivity of women. Women bring also, apart from agility and the readiness to learn, women bring, as I said, the relational skills, but they also bring an amazing wealth of the entire spectrum of workers because they are connected. The chances are if you have a woman on the port, she has a connection on the shore side of operations in retail, that sort of thing. We are all on the platform, and I saw folks saying, you know, I am in Mexico, I'm in Argentina, and it's so very easy for us to connect the dots. And so we are saying we also bring a readiness to work. Give us the opportunity. Women who are already in the industry bring the opportunity, bring the gifts of mentoring and coaching. And though the women who are coming into port work have to bring their own knowledge with them, the expertise can be borrowed and shared from the women who are already in the space. And so what we bring is a readiness to bring a value-added component to the workspace, return on investment when we're trained, and we're able to do it while we do other things. Just drives.
Wonderful, Yvette. Thank you so much. And yes, you pointed it out. I think the way we connect, right, is very unique to us and to us women in a male-dominated industry. I think that maybe resulted from a need, right, to connect. But I see here we are over 70 participants from all across the Americas. I know that we also have a YouTube live stream where there's another group of participants watching us. So I think that really speaks to that spirit of staying connected and also sharing experiences and learning from one another. Please go ahead.
Just taking 2 minutes to make this plug, or one of our participants mentioned that there are other groups of persons who are in the minority. And we talk about the physically challenged communities. We talk about, well, if we check the chat, we'll see. And I wanted to point out what I said, that once we come in here, you're going to have to expect activism because we are asking for equity. We tend to not so much want to push the word equality out there, but give what is fair to the individuals so that they can participate at their best. Because you may give equally and still not sufficient. So give what is fair. So activism is a strong part of what women bring to the table without being acrimonious, you know?
Yes.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you so much for that.
Mona, I want to give my colleague an opportunity, but there's a very thoughtful question, and it was sent direct, and I think I would like to put it out there. That's in the chat. Please. And it says, because I can see both. I can see both Yvette and Cynthia giving some guidance here. The question is, what can we do if experiencing career deprivation? Could we, by example, report these? And I'm not sure the idea of career deprivation. I'll yield to Yvette or Cynthia to give some a thought about this if you have a response. But career deprivation, if they're experiencing that, I can tell you, I shift and pivot whenever there are opportunities. I'm a little probably more experienced in my career path, but to that person, I just like to tell you that one of the things about career deprivation, if I'm understanding your question, is to tell you that if you find that you are stagnant in a role, always seek opportunities to learn a new skill. And sometimes it is not necessarily that you are going to take a step up, sometimes a lateral move, as I've done several times in my career, where that lateral move, because I didn't see the opportunity straight up. But as Yvette mentioned about linear thought processes and learning, take the opportunity to learn something new. And sometimes it may be that you have to step in a lateral space to get out of where you may be stalled. I wanted to respond to that question, but Yvette or Cynthia, I don't know if you have a thought about career deprivation.
Oh, yes. I think that it's an interesting, thanks for asking that, Jennifer. It's really great because I think no matter what, when you are a woman that has come up through the years of experience that we three have, you know, how many times have you found yourself at a table with all men? And how many times when you found yourself at that table, at least in when I was in my 20s and 30s, how many times were you the one asked to get the coffee? I can't count the times. And so there are a few really simple, maybe even trite answers to that question. Number one, don't give up. Number two, own your own space and your own person. So if you feel that this lack of opportunity is systemic and it is something that you don't want to spend your career to overcome, move, pivot, try something else, prepare, don't put yourself in harm's way to do that, but prepare and pivot. And, that sounds easy, but it's not easy. It really is not, because all of us have personal responsibilities and commitments. And, you don't want to leave and burn bridges in an organization in which you are. But I don't think, lastly, that it is wrong to voice a wish, a request, a concern. How you do it is quite important. I like very much Dr. Johnson's points about trying to refrain from being acrimonious, trying to refrain from being the person who is creating more fear for gender gap closure than she is creating an atmosphere of trust. It isn't on your back. It's not you only that are responsible for this, but to the extent that you have power, try to use that in a positive way where you are adding to the value of your job, your organization, and your colleagues before you make your final decision that you're experiencing problems. Sometimes those are problems that you can, with a slight change of attitude, solve. Sometimes it's impossible and you have to just move out or pivot or change.
And if Mona, if I can add, the question also speaks to discrimination, and I will add the elephant in the room, sexual harassment.
Yes.
We know that spaces like the OAS, the IMO, WEMAC, we are vehemently against these things, but we recognize that a response has to be a coordinated response, and it is bigger than, let's say, reporting to the captain. The captain may be the person who is giving trouble. It is bigger than reporting to the ship owners or the shipping company. We want an international lobby where all stakeholders are putting their weight on these things to stamp them out, whether it's just bullying or it goes over to the sexual harassment. And for WEMAC, and I suppose WISTA and the other groups, we are activist groups. We want a presence. If, for example, and I'll use Jamaica because that's where I'm sitting this morning, still morning for us. If we have a national chapter for the Women in Maritime Association in Jamaica, if there is a regular meeting in that space, then a woman who has a problem can find a space to report something, and we become lobbyists. We can do two things. We can now find the resources because of our sponsorship and the space in which we sit to speak to it specifically, the action, and we can find resources to speak to it in a more global way. When we sign on with PMAC, we can find the head of the Port Management Association of the Caribbean and say, this company working out of this space. When we sign on with SIP, we can say, hey, it is burning in our neck of the woods. And we want people to know, I think it is Cynthia who said it, you are not alone. You are alone when you're isolated. When we are starting, we want it to catch on that we want the camaraderie and the protection of the safety in numbers. So join us on the platforms. Let's get the national chapters going. Let's get the conversation going. We'll take the figures from Cynthia. We'll use our member at large, Jennifer Nugentile, to get to the people we want to get to. But let's stand together. They say that if you want to travel far, you have to travel alone. If you want to travel fast, travel alone. You watch the Matt Bolan movie, but when you want to travel far, travel together. To get to stamping out some of these things, we have to stand together. And that's what this platform is about. Thank you, Sid. Just wanted to say that.
No, you said it beautifully, beautifully. And I would like to wrap up with one question it's the same question for each one of you. It's a very simplified question, but if you had a magic wand and you could remove one barrier that in the past has prevented women from fully participating equally in our industry, what barrier would you remove? Jennifer.
Oh, I was going to yield to Cynthia first and interrupted her question. I think that one barrier would be ignorance. I think ignorance is an enemy to progress. And you said it so well, Yvette. Together we can make this happen. And I think together we can educate more and empower more. And I think and when I say ignorance, meaning the lack of knowledge or the lack of awareness in the context of ignorance, and associating ourselves with organizations, I've found that I am more powerful with the women that I have been partnering with in WEMAC and WISTA. I've learned so much. That would be my one magic wand. Get rid of ignorance, lack of knowledge. Don't be threatened by women.
Excellent. Cynthia?
You got me. I don't know what one thing, and it's hard for me to prioritize. I think
Tricky question.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because I have to turn the answer in a different way. I think full participation of women at every level does the job of getting rid of that ignorance or being present and having your voice heard. Now, every woman doesn't have something fantastic to say, but in the past, no women were given opportunities to say anything. So for a voice to be heard in each and every level of the enterprise is the thing I want to see, because then the fear of women being present begins to diminish, the realization of the value of having women there and what it helps to do with the organization and with the other team members in the organization. I just think that's not exactly what would I get rid of, but there you go. That's
Beautifully answered. Yvette?
Thank you, Mona. And I think we are going to just synergize here now, Cynthia and Jennifer. I would remove immediately invisibility. Yeah. So I know Tamara Lowe from Dominica, Antigua. Lanice George from Antigua. I know so many women who are moving. Nicole in Jamaica has a national chapter of WEMAC that, houses some of the most powerful women in the industry. When we speak about what we're doing, so we don't have, I don't know a female marine pilot in Jamaica, but hey, they have a master as a woman. So she sends them hither and yon. And if people could see that there's a Hortense Ross in Rarity who is in charge of the harbors, if they could see that Jennifer Nugent-Hill is doing this, if they could see people, they would know it's not impossible and we are not alone. There is an ops manager down there in Trinidad who is Jamaican, who is a woman, sorry. If people could see other people and see the contribution and our stories could be told properly, then I'm sure that not only the metrics would change, but what people desire to do would change. And so I would love to remove the invisibility from the woman who holds the hand of the powerful man who never mentions her name.
Wonderful. So if we had a magic wand, we would remove invisibility, we would remove ignorance, and we would add women's voices. And I think with that, we can wrap up a wonderful session, a very fruitful session, a fruitful discussion also here in the chat. It was my honor to moderate the session and join you accomplished women and wonderful professionals and wonderful human beings. It's always an honor to share this virtual stage with you. So thank you very much to our panelists, and a big thank you on my end to our participants. And thank you so much for the fruitful discussion here online. And I will pass the mic over to Jorge, who's back on the screen. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Mona, for such wonderful moderation of the panel today. As we expected, our expectations were met. These guys are fantastic. The three of them, like I said at the beginning, gave their perspectives from the chair from which they sit. And it is enlightening to see all the different facets and subtleties and nuances of this issue of empowering women and incorporating women into the workforce in order to increase competitiveness on the one hand, but also to level the playing field. Also the thing, and I got a couple of things here that I'd like to just briefly mention. First of all, we had in the chat and in a very insightful comment by Matwahi Radmin about intersectionality. I think that this is a very important issue of gender diversity, and it is something that we must continue to work on. That I appreciated very much. And then Christina Recci from MARAD from the United States mentioned that the IMO and organizations like WEMAC continue to seek legislative spaces to address the incidents of harassment, of sexual harassment and bullying to female seafarers out on the Big Blue by male counterparts. So that is certainly something that must be addressed and must be tackled, because until it does, women will never feel safe, and not feeling safe hampers them. Not feeling safe obviously limits their potential immediately. So that's another issue. Thank you for the comments, those insightful comments on the chat. They were not the only ones, but they're the ones that I picked up. Certainly, Cynthia spoke about digitalization and the importance of cyber security and cyber risk. I agree. As we know, the IMO has put out the note that as of January 1st, all ports in the world must have a maritime single window in order to continue being part of this global trade. And that is crucial that we focus on that as well a little bit. And this is a genderless thing, but important to keep in mind. And the security component, like Mona said, the speed at which these updates, this technological modernization is happening in the Caribbean is astonishing. And we are so happy not only to see it, but to actually be a part of it and be involved in some of the projects, technical assistance projects that we've done. So that is certainly a thing. Training, and Jennifer answered to the question of what barrier you would remove, and she said ignorance. And so ignorance, education, training, they all go hand in hand. And I think, Jen, that you had a crucial point with that. If we could all just take away the stereotypes, take away those old and antiquated gender roles that some people still have, I think that'd be a brilliant thing. Cynthia and Professor Smith-Johnson spoke about training and the human capital and the importance of having the right people at the right place. I think that's also very important that we continue to do so. Finally, my last two comments before I thank the speakers are that the comment about Generation Z, or Z, as I would say, Generation Z, which is the younger people. My daughters, which are in their mid-20s, they're digital natives. I don't know how. I can't even reply to these messages with a thumbs up. I'm asking my team, how do I do it? How do I do it? Because I can't handle it. So the fact that we have these new generations that are coming, who are digital natives, and their workplace will be digitalized, is a good thing. And also, these new generations are coming without the stereotypes and without the antiquated gender roles that I was just mentioning too. So that's one thing. And as my conclusion from all that we've heard from the speakers is that there are certainly, with the pictures that Cynthia showed and the other speakers and the participation in all levels and sectors of the industry, is advances have certainly been made, and they're apparent and readily there to be seen. That said, you all identified important gaps that still need to be addressed, and so work must continue. And on that, in the SIP, you have an ally for any and all efforts that lead to this. No, thank you. So with that, I'll end because we're a little late, but I want to thank Jennifer. I want to say thank Yvette and Cynthia, as well as Monica and Mona and Real ID for their technological support. It is through activities like this, Jen, that we can get rid of that ignorance, that we can bring awareness to the community and make this a better thing. And finally, I have to agree with Jennifer and her comment that competence and attitude are completely non-gender specific. So I think that is certainly true. So thank you all. I really thank you. I ask you to wait 2 or 3 minutes. They're going to move us to another room so we can chat privately. I thank the audience for their interest and their engagement, which is always very, very important. And I remind everyone that with the permission of the presenters, their presentations will be available in the SIP portal as of tomorrow, as well as the recording of this webinar. With that said, I'm just going to give the floor briefly to Cynthia, to Yvette, and to Jen in that order so that they can say their goodbyes. Cynthia, if you would be so kind.
I just want to tell you, I'm so appreciative, Jorge, Monica, for this opportunity, because I'm at a stage in my career where it's important for me to explain what I can, tell people what my experiences are, and hopefully help to move things forward as people helped me and as people have mentored me in different ways. So this sort of opportunity to speak to other women and actually to enterprises that are in the maritime area, it's so important. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yvette, please.
Thank you, Jorge, and Mona and Monica, bless you. Thank you for the platform. On behalf of the Women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean, we want our voice out there. We want to welcome anyone who wants to join us. I also say, as an educator working out of an METI, here at Caribbean Maritime University, and I dare say across the METIs, we are ready and able to work on the capacity building where skills and the knowledge is concerned. And we know that we can partner with SIP and the CSA and PMAC to give some of those scholarships to women. And so we're looking forward to continued synergy. Above all, I just thank you for today and the opportunity for sharing with Cynthia and Jennifer. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to Jen, let me tell you that I'll speak to Mona to make sure that we have more of these webinars this year on this important topic. So you can all be sure that we will continue to raise awareness and do this work that we are able to do to give these platforms to important women leaders like yourselves, so they can convey their experiences, their insights, and their learning curve reduced for the rest. Jen, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Jorge, I think Jen had to hop off.
Oh, she did. That's why I'm not seeing her here. Okay. Well, indeed. Thank you all again for your dedication, for the time, for the interest, and for supporting the SIP's work in this very, very important area. We will see you all soon. Please be mindful of our next events and our portal and our calendar. And if not, just reach out directly. We'll be happy to fill you in. Thank you very much. Hasta la vista. Gracias.